My name is Robert Asencio. I am at Miami's Community Newspapers. And today I wanted to bring a show that deals with an event or events and reactions that are very much consuming the local media, the politics, and putting out a lot of hot air, rhetoric from politicians, the community, and let's see who's driving this agenda. We're going to talk about the protests on the island of Cuba, the reactions in Miami by, again, the community, politicians, and let's see if we can get into who's driving the narrative, because many of you will be very surprised. To my right, I am honored to present Quinn, and he's an attorney. He lives in the Little Havana area, and also he's been knocking on doors in Little Havana, speaking to people and getting reactions on not just from Cubans who have come from the island, but people who have been living here for a while, and also other Latinos from different parts of the country and different parts of the world. Also on today will be Sasha Tirador to give us a perspective on the political side, who's driving the train. I think you're going to be very interested in following the conversation. So without further ado, welcome, Quinn. How are you?
I'm doing excellent. Thank you, Robert. Thank you for having me.
So you know what, Quinn, I dropped your last name, Quinn Smith.
Yeah,
right?
it's okay.
So tell us a little bit about you and what you're doing and this conversation of how you're involved in it.
Sure. So I am Quinn Smith. I'm a lawyer at the firm of GST LLP. I'm also running for Miami City Commission District 3, and part of the district includes what I would call the heart of Little Havana.
So habla español.
Sí, hablo.
Okay.
So as a result, part of my campaign is going out and talking to people. And every day I'm knocking on doors, and I'm talking to people, from all over. Many Cuban Americans, but also many people from Peru, from Colombia, from Puerto Rico, and getting a real feel for the reaction of folks from all different economic backgrounds and from different places in their lives.
So what has been the reaction of people that you're going to the doors, you're knocking on the doors, you're introducing yourself, but what are they saying about, not just the protests on the island, which we know it started roughly 12 days ago, the mass protests across the island. People were complaining that they were compelled to get on the street. Finally, many, first time in their life, certainly others, first time since 1994, mass protests around the island. The internet helped them get their message out and expand their protests. But, they're saying they're coming out because of horrible living conditions, a repressive totalitarian government, a government that has been subpar in dealing with the island's needs, the nation's needs, right? An island that's government is it's a failed state. It literally is a failed state. An island that for all accounts, it's killing its people. A government that is killing its people because the conditions of COVID, the conditions of economics, the conditions of hunger. Hey, it's not something that they can only blame the U.S. for. They have ownership. They are the government of the island. They are the ones who are repressing the people. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I think the thing that I hear the most whenever I speak to folks is they wanted to feel that the president was supporting them.
Okay.
And that was really one of the first things that I got.
¿Y cómo se sienten?
Yo usé la palabra que me usó una señora. Desilusionada.
So they're disillusioned.
That was the first word that she said to me whenever I opened the door, and she just wanted to know that the president was with her, that was going to support her, and that's a similar sentiment I've heard at other places. And then some people have more basic need-based reactions. One gentleman almost with tears in his eyes describing, how he wanted to talk to his brother who had lived there, how he wanted to be able to send him money, but that he couldn't. And so there are also sort of these, core human passions and needs that are not
Quinn,
met.
Let me ask you, how before we bring Sasha Tirador, because I'm going to bring her in real quick, but how do they feel about local elected leaders saying that it's time to either invade, bomb, or otherwise take military action on Cuba?
So that is just a total non-starter. I'll give you a story from a couple in Shenandoah, and they said, we came here for freedom, and when the couple, the wife, she was with Pedro Pan flights. She said, we came here for freedom. We received opportunity, but we've also been given our own lie, and the lie that we've been fed is the lie that now is the time, that tomorrow is the day, that this is when everything's are going to change, fed by people in political power who were just using it for their own means. And so that was a sentiment that came directly from her and from her husband. And what they wanted was a breath of fresh air. They wanted a different way to look at it. And so I think that really speaks to what you were saying just now.
Wow. So Patria y Vida. Tommy, are we ready to bring on Sasha Tirador?
We are.
Sasha, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, how are you? Good afternoon, gentlemen. And my name is Sasha Tirador, and I am happy to be here with you, be part of the conversation.
We're so happy to have you, Sasha. You look great with the glasses. You take them off. I can't see you. Pero mi amor, let's get into this, because this is a conversation I know you're very versed in. You've taught me a few things on this conversation. So what do you have to add about the reactions in Miami by not just the community, but lo político, and who is driving this agenda?
No one, and that is the main problem. There is a Cuban exile before Jorge Mascanosa, and there is a Cuban exile after Jorge Mascanosa. And prior to that, it was a much more organized plan. We actually had goals that we needed to achieve, whether it be within the island of Cuba or in Congress. No one is organized. The only people that have taken over the bus are elected officials that the only thing they want is to obtain votes out of the Cuban crisis. They have no clue half of the time what they're talking about. They don't know a damn thing about Cuban history. So how can you, formulate a plan that would actually benefit the Cuban people? You don't even speak to people who came yesterday from Cuba. You don't mingle with them. That's not your crowd. So it's
Sasha, hold it 1 second. Let me ask you, what are the comments that they're saying? Because I've read some, I've heard some on the internet, but what are the comments that Lo Politico is saying? And then what do you have to say to that?
Listen, it's unfortunate that we have an electorate that falls for the hypocrisy and the misinformation that is being fed to them by some elected officials. That simply have taken advantage, not now, ever since 1959. Listen, I was born in this country. I come from, Cuban parents that came to Miami in 1962. My grandfather fought in the Bay of Pigs War. So I know my history. I know my Cuban exile history. And we've been here and we've done this. So to people like me, what makes me emotional and what gives me hope is the actual folks within the island. That is a absolute new generation that has nothing to do with the Cuban Revolution. That's what gives me hope, because they're in the street. Now, the Cuban exile organizations, the ones that are taking up all the media space, we could say, are Cuban exile organizations that need to find a job if the regime were to fall tomorrow, because the only thing that they live off is federal funding.
So we come back to the big dollar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've heard this. We've heard politicians say, and these individuals from these organizations say, give them the internet, give them internet access. Is it that simple? Will that resolve the problems of the people in Cuba? Will that allow the people in Cuba to be able to liberate themselves, which they have the right to liberate themselves? Mm-hmm. So I asked both of you, Quinn, you want to chime in on that? And I'd love to hear from you, Sasha.
Sure. I mean, I can chime in on that. I mean, the internet is crucial as a means of communication, but just having the internet isn't going to be enough. What if the government then begins to use that internet in a way that drowns out the voices of the people? What if we see massive amounts of misinformation and disinformation that thwarts the goals. And also the internet isn't necessarily going to put solve that problem I told you about, the gentleman who's separated from his family, who wants to be able to send money to his brother. It's crucial. It's a component, but to say that it's the solution, I think is a bridge too far.
What about you, Sasha? What do you think?
I absolutely agree with that. It's important. It's part of the puzzle. It should not be the main plan, even though a very important piece of that plan, which, by the way, would not be possible today. And we would not be able to view all the videos and see the footage and all the pictures of what's going on inside the island had it not been for the Obama administration that negotiated for the people of Cuba to have internet access. So that's for starters. And whatever, I don't want to make this partisan, but, I do have to answer to those voices that are in Congress that are Cuban American and Republican, that I remember when the Obama administration put forth the plan of bringing the internet to Cuba, they called it outrageous. And now that's all they call for. It's just pure hypocrisy. So yes, it is part of the puzzle. It is an important part and it's crucial, but it is not the means for through which the Cuban people will obtain their liberty.
So let me go back to you on that. For those elected officials that are in Congress, that are in the U.S. Senate, and that are calling on the president to do more, whether it be military invasion, military strike, that is hypocrisy, wouldn't you say? Because where were they when the same thing was happening in Venezuela? Did we invade Venezuela a year ago, 2 years ago? Did we? And is that realistic? I say not. What do you say to that? To those calls for invasion?
Number one, it's not realistic. The United States, and it's important for the people of Cuba to know that the United States will not invade Cuba unless Cuba invades us first. And that's not going to happen. Number one. Number two, it is absolutely pure hypocrisy because their argument stems from partisan politics, and they are chanting, if Trump were president, he would have invaded Cuba. Well, that argument went out the window 2 to 3 days ago when ex-President Donald Trump was interviewed and he was asked a question by a member of the local media. And, they asked him, Mr. President, if you would be in office right now, would you invade Cuba? And he said, that never crossed my mind because I didn't find it necessary. So there you go. That argument goes out the window. Number three, if you are so gung-ho on invading Cuba, then I suggest that you get on your little boat and you don't ask for permission and do what you think you should do. But we don't see anybody doing that, right? Because it's very easy to cry out for war drinking coffee at a local 8th Street restaurant. That is very easy to do. And number four.
The papelitos are great, by the way.
Well, it depends which restaurant we're actually talking about.
A little levity here.
But number four, according to this crowd, the president of the United States, Joe Biden, is an illegitimate president because he did not win the election. So what are you asking for? What are you asking for? Is he or is he not the president? If he is the president, you get to ask him for things. If he's not, according to you, then you don't get to ask him for things. You don't get to have it both ways.
So let's talk about Versailles, because that's where the route, this like ground zero in Miami has been for the reactions to this protest. So I was reading in the Tampa Bay Times today a recap, if you will, of the Hannity show that was filmed there a couple days ago, right? And it appears that although the talking points, and this is not partisan, this is just what's been reported, that the title of the article was GOP slams the president for not doing enough, something along those lines. And in the body of the article, it talks about what happened in that meeting. And it appears that even within that core group of people who were driving this agenda saying that attacking the president, there's dissension because there was an extremist identified group that supposedly was in that meeting that was calling out our Senator Rubio, our Congresswoman Maria Elvira, and also some of the local leaders saying that they weren't Republican enough. So it's very clear that this is a political football, if you will, that's being played while people on the island continue to suffer. And did you have any input, or have you had anyone tell you about what happened during that meeting at Versailles that I'm speaking of, that was referenced in the Tampa Bay Times?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard that much about it directly. A lot of the comments that I'm receiving, I would say, are more visceral in nature, and I think it speaks to the fact that although some try to use this for political gain, most people, they really don't want to see it that way. What they want to see is that they want to see freedom. They want to see be able to see their family again, and that's where their focus is. There are always going to be some who want to see it merely through this political angle, but I think a lot of people don't, and that's what and that's what I'm hearing.
So, Sacha, what do you have you heard anything about what that meeting entailed, or what I just cited from the Tampa Bay Times?
Well, I know that it's not enough people to go to war, if that is what the chant is, because I mean, you didn't even make it to 200 people. That's number one. So there goes that. Number two, it was just pure rhetoric. And yes, outside there was the very well known group, the Proud Boys, that was chanting to Congresswoman Salazar that she was a communist. Now, whether she is or she is not, that is debatable. She has held different positions throughout her career, but that's not the point. The point is that if, according to this group, Congresswoman Salazar is a communist, then Jesus, what are the rest of us, right? Because we are absolutely way to the left of her. So it's just pure cult. It's a cult. It is the Trump cult that is as dangerous as communism.
Oh, is it really that simple? So let's shift a little bit towards a free Cuba. What would that be?
Hmm.
Do you think, Sasha? Do you believe that there are forces here that do not want a free Cuba, that are part of this, manifestation of reactions? And can you point to some of those or examples of those groups?
Well, I can think of one AM station that would absolutely either go broke, have to close down, or completely change their entire programming if there was a free Cuba. I can think of at least 200 businesses that would have to close their doors if there were a free Cuba. And I can think of at least three federal uh, elected officials that would have to actually find another job because they would lose their reelection because they would have nothing to campaign on if there was a free Cuba. And I can think of 10 political organizations that are supposedly patriotic Cuban exile organizations that would have to, for the first time in 20-25 years, have to find a job because the federal funding would be cut off to them.
Yeah. What about you? Any thoughts on that?
I think whenever I reflect on what a free Cuba looks like, we would have to really become comfortable with the complexity of that answer. Because if it's to be determined by the people that are there, it may not be something that most of us would expect. It may look different. It may not be what some have hoped for. But if they are to liberate themselves and to do it the way that they want to, then that could provide for some uncomfortable moments for us here in Miami. And I would say that we have to embrace that discomfort. I went to a rally that was held, and there were a lot of people at that rally who politically I wouldn't agree with.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to embrace that, because to me that's a part of any kind of solution that we're going to see.
Yeah, so absolutely. So
I
my
think
my wife.
important.
Go ahead, Sasha, please.
I think that what Quinn just said is very important, because what our perception of a free Cuba may look like is not necessarily the reality. And my question is very simple, and I think it's a perfect example of what Quinn is talking about. Are we willing? And when I say we, I mean as a whole, as the Cuban American community, with all our differences. How are we going to react when we find a little old lady at a bus stop crying? And when you ask her, why are you crying, ma'am? She tells you, oh, because I miss Fidel Castro. What are you going to do? How are you going to accept that? How will you interpret it? And, are you willing to understand that there is no punishment for that? She is allowed to cry for whoever she wishes, even if you disagree the reason why she's crying.
That's a great point. Like we've seen the footage that had been coming out of Cuba. As a matter of fact, preparing for the show, I went back on the internet and tapped into some sources that I have, and they send me a whole slew of videos. You amongst the protesters or amongst the protests, right? Opposite of the protesters who are against the government, you see civilians. Some of them obviously are military people, police, part of the government system to trust the civilians. But you see some civilians that point to exactly what you just said. They're sympathizers, and this is what they know, this is what they believe in, and this is what they want their Cuba to be. So, look, I look forward to a free Cuba. I mean, my God, 90 miles from Cuba. I mean, from Key West, it would be wonderful to be able to hop on an airplane or even a boat and shoot down to Cuba, spend a little bit of my money down there, but enjoy what that island has to offer. It's a great island. That's the pearl of the Caribbean that has actually been stuck in time and actually repressed by this regime. But let's talk about what are the options that the U.S. government has to deal with effectively, deal with the situation, but also help the people on the island. I know the president announced some sanctions, specifically against the defense minister of Cuba and La Boina Negra. But what other options? We have both covert and overt, and I'm sure that some covert actions are being taken, as they always have been taken, currently as we speak. But overtly, what are those options that we have? Can you guys talk about that? Can you shed a little bit of information for the audience?
I'll just start, and maybe Sasha, you can join in. I think that it's important for us in Miami to realize that as much as this issue dominates our day, it doesn't register for many people in this country and around the world. And so to me, I think that the next important step is that we have to connect with people who aren't in Miami or who aren't a part of Cuban American communities or those that are from Latin America in some way, to help people understand why this is important. That it has to happen in the United States, and it has to happen in other parts of the world, in order to really have a multilateral solution.
Sure. Sasha, any thoughts?
I absolutely agree with that. I think the number one failure of the Cuban exile has been precisely that we have not exported our truth to other communities for them to understand what a totalitarian government really looks like 90 miles away from the most democratic country on earth, right? So that's number one. And this is why when now we need support from other communities, there is such little support. Because at the end of the day, we haven't done a very good job at being supportive of other communities when they have gone through their strifes. So you reap what you sow. That's number one. Number two, I had the honor to be part of the group that was part of the White House briefing on the sanctions. And this, I hear a lot of misinformation. These sanctions go well beyond criminalizing the very well-known top figures of the Cuban government, which, as we know, is Raul Castro, the president of the country, Miguel Diaz-Canel, and every single general from there on. This has this causes a direct impact. And the reason why I keep saying it's historic is because it is global, number one. So if you are a very unknown person that decided to follow orders from the president of Cuba to go out and beat up your fellow citizens when they were protesting in a very peaceful manner, and you do not know the difference between maintaining law and order and violating human rights on the streets of Cuba, then you will be held accountable. And there will be a way where families on the island and outside of the island can denounce folks like these that are not your typical generals and military powerful people, so they can know it doesn't matter where you go, unless it's places like Iran or Venezuela, but wherever there is a civilized country, the Magnitsky Act, Global Acts Act says that you will can be, and it gives the president of the United States the authority to hold you liable for violations of human rights wherever you go, whenever that is. It doesn't have an expiration date. So does this eliminate does this keep the majority of the repressive forces on the island from beating up people in the streets? No, but it does make half of them say, let me not do it. Let me see if I pretend to be sick this day. I don't know how they're going to go around it, but it will make them think twice, because at the end of the day, more than half of the repressive forces that are not known want to leave the island of Cuba. And you will not be able to go anywhere. You're going to have to stay there. And in a free Cuba, there will be a judicial system that will hold these people accountable. And if you try to leave, you will not be able to do so. Why? Because you will not be able to enter any country. And if you do, Interpol will catch you. And that's just the way, that's the importance of these sanctions. Now, well-intentioned people will tell you what I am telling you, which is the truth. Bad intentions, Cuban Americans with bad intentions that are up for re-election will say, oh, this is sanctions, not enough, blah, blah, blah. And then there are the people, the majority of the folks that are misinformed about the importance of these sanctions that the White House explained that they were going to move forward with yesterday.
So for those of you just chiming in or just joining us, we're on Miami's Community News. I'm here with Quinn Smith, who's in the city of Miami. He's an attorney. I'm here also with Sasha Tirador from GNR Strategies. We're discussing the reactions of the Cuban protests on the island here locally by the community, politicians, and who's driving the train or the agenda. Very important conversation for us to continue to have. You just said, Sasha, something that struck me very, very hard here. You said this is a global, incident. And I was reading today, I think it was the New York Times, there was a little article that pointed to, in the last 20 years, perhaps a little more than 20 years, that's in the past just over 2 decades, this is the biggest uprising, civilian uprising in a totalitarian regime worldwide. So if the Cubans, the people of Cuba on the island, achieve the goal of doing away with the current government, what does that do to the rest of the totalitarian, communist, socialist, whatever you call them, regimes around the globe? Mm-hmm. This is a conversation and an action that our government needs to be measured about and needs to have a lot of thinking and a lot of strategy behind it. Because one era, we follow some of these politicians locally here and invade or attack or do something otherwise not well thought of, can break a lot of pieces and create a whole lot of hurt around the globe for our interest and many people across the world.
Yeah. Robert, I think you did touch on something that maybe is a way for those of us who do have a lot of friends outside of Miami, is to convey where Cuba sits in relation to Latin America, and how in many ways the regime in Cuba is a leader of other repressive regimes, and that achieving liberty in Cuba would have an impact throughout Latin America. I mean, I think that you really would see changes in people being brave enough to go back out onto the streets in other repressive countries. And so I think that it is important to have that more global look at it. And it's also important for us to be supportive, because what happens in Cuba will have an impact, and our policies in Cuba will have an impact when it comes to other countries in the region.
Thank you. Sasha, any thoughts on that?
100%. Cuba has been, since 1959, the number one exporter, not only of socialism, that's, philosophy, not only of communism, that's a couple books you could read, agree or disagree with that, but the number one exporter of massive corruption. because that is what Cuba is. The Cuban regime is nothing but a bunch of thugs that are corrupt and have exported that type of benefit myself and my family and close friends only to other countries where, unfortunately, they sell you the socialism and communist dream that we know does not work when put into effect. But people will believe it, the people of those countries. And then what happens? Well, the model to follow for those leaders is the Cuban model, which is corruption, which is being a thug, and it is a benefit myself and my family only while I fool the people.
Powerful words, great guests. Guys, I'd love to invite you, because we're running out of time, to a next show. I think that you guys have a lot to offer to this conversation. Will you join me in the next couple of weeks in expanding and broadening this conversation? Because you know what? If the local leaders are not going to do it, then let's go ahead, because we are part of the community. Let's go ahead and start the conversation and put it in the right course, put it in the right context. I'm Robert Asencio. I'm here with Quinn Smith, Sasha Tirador, and Miami's Community Newspapers. Tommy Stitt, our producer behind the scenes, always there. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing you. Join us. Drop us a line. Let us know what you think. Look forward to speaking to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.